Everyone, welcome. I'm Tom Phillips. I lead a team of Azure specialists for Microsoft. These are the folks that you work with every day to help understand everything Azure, including Fabric and agents. And I'm thrilled to have you with us today. And on behalf of Microsoft, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us. We're excited to partner with Lantern today. They have agreed to come and give us this special look into how we can do more with the Fabric data agents and also what is the next wave of AI-powered data experiences and what that means for your organization. And with that very short introduction, I'll hand this back off to Jeremy Bierlein and Jeff Johnston, and they'll host the main presentation for today. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Tom. Well, welcome everybody. As Tom said, my name is Jeremy Bierlein. I'm a principal technology strategist here at Lantern. If you aren't familiar with Lantern, we are a data and AI first consulting organization, proud Microsoft partner, really focused on drilled in on how our customers can maximize their business value inside and outside their organization with their data and AI estate. I'm really pleased to be joined again by one of my peers, Jeff Johnston. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Yvette. Thanks, Jeremy. Hey, guys, I'm Jeff Johnston. So I've been with the organization for almost 19 years, 25 years total in the app dev and data and AI space. And like Jeremy, I'm also a principal technology strategist here at Lantern. I also serve as one of the architects as part of the partner engagement program at the Dallas Innovation Hub at Microsoft. And then I also teach Fabric and Databricks at SMU here in Dallas as well. So across a few different programs. So we're happy to have you guys here and looking forward to a great discussion.
So with that, we're going to kick off with a poll. We'll do a couple of these just so we can get a sense of where everybody is here in your particular journey. So our first question here, this helps us tailor the day to you. Where is your organization on your journey with Microsoft Fabric? So we'll give it a minute here. Once you vote, you're going to be able to see the results. We have some exploring and learning. We've got some pilots. We've got in production. Thanks for joining in on the responses, proof of concept. All right. I mean, it looks like, Jeff, we have a broad distribution today, but also a healthy slug of folks looking at what's next. So this is really helpful for us to meet you all where you are. So thank you for that. So for today's episode, we're going to ground ourselves in why is using AI with structured data such a challenge. I'll share one of my war stories from 2 years ago in the early days of Gen AI. Jeff will unpack what are Microsoft Fabric data agents and how do they fit into this expanded intelligence IQ ecosystem that's being launched by Microsoft. How do they help you actually get at your trusted data in a better way? What are some good use cases? What are some early insights? We were implementing Fabric data agents before they went general availability as part of FabCon. So we've definitely, along with our customers, learned a few things along the way. And then just where do they fit overall within the ecosystem? So that'll be our topics for today. As we move through, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. Otherwise, what we'll do is at the end, we'll have folks raise their hand in addition to going through questions in the chat. So with that, let's get underway. About 2 years ago, I was approached actually in partnership with Microsoft with hey, we have a customer who has a huge data warehouse of scanned aircraft maintenance records. So think old style OCR, a lot of varying formats, basically dumped into a bunch of tables. And it went something along the lines of, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could have a chat with our data bot for those scanned maintenance forms? We've got 6 weeks to build a demo. Should be simple, right? Those of you who have already experimented in this space, you know where this story is going, right? So let's talk about what we did then and how now Microsoft is offering up things that allow you to do this in a much better way. So let's look back at how I did this. If you want to do the next slide, Jeff. So situation, typical web app and database is what they had. So you can manually go explore all these maintenance forms and decades of scanned records in an Azure SQL database. So how did we try and go after this one? So if you want to build out, AI was going to struggle with this one. Throwing a large language model, the English major of the AI family, at a bunch of data that was never normalized when it was dumped into a database table, had all of your typical obtuse naming. If you can't understand what a column is, picking up someone else's database, AI is going to struggle. There was no data catalog or data dictionary. And the demo use case they were interested in, and they said, hey, well, we have these maintenance records, and the FAA has these service bulletins that say these things have to be done. Can we try and match up these two? Can I converse with my data and say, on this particular aircraft engine, have I performed all the FAA mandated updates and service advisories? So there were brand new relationships that weren't even represented in their existing application database. So how did we try and go after this? So if you look, the first thing we did, by the way, this comes with a huge asterisk. Don't do this, at least this way right now. But you will find yourself having to work through a lot of similar issues. So first step, we basically created views that flattened out the relationships, gave it more human naming so the AI could better grab on to the data and the relationships in the table. And we ended up enriching the table. Back then, state of the art was GPT-4 or GPT-4.0, I think, literally showed up 2 weeks before our demo. And then what we ended up doing on the top is we had paragraphs. If you dumped it out into a Word document, it was probably 3.5 pages of pre-prompting that explained the data structure. Every time a session was instantiated, a conversation was instantiated, it explained a bunch of the relationships. It offered some model interactions if you ask about this, plus all the other sort of role and pre-prompting goodness that you would normally do. I would say even with all of this, we were able to get to a demo, but you can imagine both the level of data engineering here, as well as all of this pre-prompting resulted in a solution that could paint a vision, but honestly was relatively fragile and certainly not enterprise class from that perspective. So again, look at this in terms of saying, you still, as data leaders or business leaders in your organization, when you're going after data with AI, you still need to answer or solve a lot of these questions around context, around relationship, around data accessibility to a large language model. The great news is you don't have to hack it together like I did 2 years ago in a demo. And Jeff is going to walk through the rich toolbox that's available to you now to really unlock your enterprise structured data. So with that, Jeff. Oh, sorry. First, a quote. What's your biggest blocker in enabling chat with your structured data today? You heard my horror story. Let's talk about yours. So, Summer, if you could open the voting. Now, I know you might have wished we would have been able to let you check more than one, but we all have our biggest pains. So thank you for prioritizing. Okay, solid on definitions, data scattered across systems, security and governance concerns. That's a big one. If your organization was one of the ones that just turned on Copilot without a lot of prep work, M365 Copilot, your concerns are thoughtful here. All right. Security governance, scattered across systems, definition and business meaning are not documented. All right. Well, cool. Thanks everybody for voting. And Jeff, take it away.
Sounds good. Well, I think the good news is that there is a better way to unlock your data for AI versus what Jeremy and kind of the war story that he had to go through there. And I think we want to start this conversation and how we go about creating Fabric data agents with understanding what is this whole Fabric IQ thing that Microsoft has introduced as part of this overall agentic offering. And so last fall at the Microsoft Ignite conference, Microsoft announced 3 different IQs. They announced Fabric IQ related to the data platform, Foundry IQ related to the AI platform, and Work IQ related to Microsoft's M365 modern work and productivity platform. So our focus today is on Fabric IQ and Fabric Data Agents, which we're going to dive into here. And so with this announcement of Fabric IQ, we all know that your AI agents are only as good as the data that they are grounded in. And with Microsoft Fabric, organizations can have transactional databases, they can have real-time databases, lakehouses, semantic models, and so on. And so that presents, depending on how much you have adopted within your Fabric platform, it presents potentially a lot of complexity. And that complexity could potentially obscure how the business is put together from a various business domains like finance and sales and operations and so on. And so in order to help add to the understanding of how the business works and the relationships that exist between different entities in the business, that is really where Fabric IQ comes into play. Essentially, Fabric IQ is a semantic intelligence layer inside of Microsoft Fabric, and it allows us to create ontology-driven semantics on top of one lake. So this kind of helps us transform all of the raw data into business entities like customers and orders and inventory and so on. That enables these agents to then reason over the business meaning, not just the raw tables and raw data that we have. And so we'll kind of walk through how all this works, but essentially it's designed to be reusable, whether it's across analytics or BI or agentic automation. You can reuse these Fabric IQ across all of that. And so if I was to summarize what that is, it bridges the analytics and the operations and allows agents to perform some of this multi-hop reasoning that they are maturing to be able to accomplish. And so let's just continue on here and say, without this semantic understanding of what's going on with your data in your business, you're going to have different teams. If you're a finance team or you're a sales team or so on, you're going to have different business units that care about different things. And we just don't have that kind of holistic view of what is going on and how the different areas of the business are related, the different entities of the business are related to each other. So that's where this Fabric IQ and these ontologies come into play to really provide that semantic understanding across the enterprise and how they relate to each other. So that's where Fabric IQ comes in, right? It provides that semantic intelligence layer, and the ontology is really this key component that we create inside of Fabric as an item. And I'll walk you through how to do that here shortly. But it also creates a few other things. It also creates a graph database that allows you to represent the nodes and edges of these different items in your business as well. And it allows us to create all the different entity types, the relationships, the properties, the constraints. You can even go as far as to create rules and actions around these different entities if certain things occur, like if certain thresholds are crossed from a data perspective. And so anyway, just wanted to walk you through what that looks like. And so with that, I'm going to take you through what it takes to create a Fabric ontology in a very simple way to do this. You can make it kind of as simple or as complex as you would like to. In this case, I am going to build one off of a semantic model. If you're familiar with Power BI and creating the semantic models in Power BI, that's how we're going to get this started. What I want to show first is my Fabric workspace that I have here. And you can see I've got various objects within my Fabric workspace. I've got a little data warehouse. I've got a few pipelines. I've created a semantic model on top of my warehouse so that it will support all of my Power BI reporting and other things. So if I pop into my semantic model here, you can see I've got a few dimensions across the top, like our date dimension and customer and product, store and order status. And then along the left side, I've got my fact tables. So I've got my order item and inventory snapshot. And so I've got clean relationships. It's a fairly simplified model. And when we talk about being able to create an ontology, one of the ways we can do is there's a new little icon there called Generate Ontology at the top on the ribbon. And so we can click that and it will create an ontology from our semantic model. And so I'm just going to give it a name, Zava Retail, because this is all based on Zava, our do-it-yourself retail store, which is a kind of a fictional Washington State home improvement company with 8 different locations. So here we are in kind of the ontology UI, where it has created our different entities from our semantic model and the different relationships that we have here. And what we're able to do in this ontology is to make sure that all of our data is bound properly. And so here we have our order item fact table, and we can see it has automatically detected some of the bindings for us, but hey, sometimes it misses one, right? And so we needed to make sure that we add our entity key for this particular entity order item and another one for inventory snapshot as well. And so this just ensures that we're all pointed to the right data underneath, but we're providing this kind of business representation of the different entities in our business. And we're able to leverage that down the road as part of our data agents as well. Okay, so that was just a quick way to show you guys what all we're dealing with from creating the ontologies. And so next, I want to go in here, if I can, go to the next slide. And so now we've got our ontology built. What we're going to do next is now go create our actual Fabric data agent as well. And so we know that, as Jeremy alluded to, for a long time, data has been trapped behind all of these technical barriers. And typically it was only accessible to who could write SQL or who knew DAX or who could build dashboards and all of that, right? It wasn't necessarily available to just anyone to ask a natural language question unless you had very sophisticated tools. And so with Fabric data agents, the idea is this access to all of your structured data has been democratized. And so anyone in the organization can have a direct and trusted conversation with their data in plain English with all of the enterprise grade security built in. And that is important to anytime we're having a conversation with our data. We want to make sure that it's not just going to allow anyone to see whatever data is there in our Fabric environment. We need to make sure that it respects all of the OneLake security and security around each one of these entity types or data source types as well. So what is a Fabric data agent? And it is, in fact, that conversational AI experience that allows us to answer natural language questions. Currently, we have a few different data sources that are supported by Fabric data agents. The data warehouse inside of Fabric, the lake house inside of Fabric, the event house, which is the real-time database inside of Fabric, the semantic model, which I just showed you, which typically powers Power BI reports. And then we showed how we create ontologies as well. And then another source that was added is Azure AI Search. So if you had a batch of unstructured documents, PDFs, and so on, that you wanted to surface to your Fabric data agent, Azure AI Search is a great vector database that can vectorize all of those unstructured documents and make those available to a Fabric data agent. And then we can chat with all of that structured and unstructured data. So in order to get started with Fabric data agents, there's a few things that you kind of need to have in place before you get started. Some of these things will require you to get with your Fabric tenant administrators to make sure these things are turned on. First of all, it's good to know that you only need an F2 capacity or higher, but you do need a fabric capacity. So you can see at the lowest end, an F2 capacity is only $262 a month retail, and then you can go up from there. When it comes to some of the tenant settings that we need to enable, you can see that I've got a list of them here. I've also have a link down at the bottom of this screen. If you want to see the official Microsoft documentation on this, there's a few of these things that you will need to make sure you have turned on and make sure that in order to have Fabric Data Agents work, we've got to have a few of these things turned on. So this includes enabling some of the Copilot features, enabling some of the Azure OpenAI features as well, because this is using some of the Azure OpenAI capabilities from an LLM perspective behind the scenes. These settings would have to be enabled in order for it to work properly. And if we want to have a follow-up on some of the details and deep dive on this, we're happy to have a follow-up conversation, because sometimes this can be a tripping point in order to get these things lit up. So the next thing that I want to talk about is kind of, okay, well, great. What are all the different pieces of a Fabric Data Agent, right? So we created this anatomy of a Fabric Data Agent diagram to help describe what are all the different pieces that we have here. And so first, I'd like to direct your attention to the number one thing, which is this AI and LLM layer, which is kind of the brain of your Fabric Data Agent. So as I mentioned, Fabric Data Agents apply Azure's OpenAI APIs under the hood so that it behaves like an agent. It processes user questions. It kind of determines the most relevant data source because we can select multiple. It invokes the appropriate tools if we've got tools configured with this data agent as well. We don't have to work with or supply our own Azure OpenAI keys. Fabric uses just a Microsoft managed Azure OpenAI instance in order to support Fabric Data Agents. So then we move to kind of number two, which is all of our structured and unstructured data, that body of knowledge that we can source data from. And as we mentioned, we can have up to several different types of sources: lakehouses, warehouses, semantic models, the KQL databases, and ontologies, in addition to the Azure AI Search vector databases. And so I think the ontology is kind of one of the key additions to this. If we really have a complex environment, then the ontologies can help us make sense of the business definitions and the business entities that the data agent can reason over. And so then we get to that reasoning pipeline. This is like the nervous system of the data agent. So this is where the agent follows that clear multi-step process, right? So whether it starts with kind of that question parsing and validation, where the agent ensures that the question complies with security protocols, all the responsible AI policies, and all the user permissions, and make sure that all of that stuff is strictly enforced. Then it goes through and identifies the data source that is the most appropriate to answer the question that's being asked. Sometimes it may lean on, if we've got multiple data sources, it may lean on the semantic model and issue a DAX query. Sometimes it may lean on the warehouse and issue a SQL query. And so either way, or the event house, if it's a real-time data source. So either way, it can select in real time which data source is appropriate to answer the question. And we can also provide instructions as well, which is that fourth step as part of this. Provide instructions and examples to provide the agent so it knows when it encounters these instructions, it will follow the instructions and the sample queries or examples that we provide in order to help direct it and help it on its path to providing a more deterministic answer in a probabilistic environment. So then we can get to that security layer on the diagram. It's number 7, where that's kind of the immune system. Fabric Data Agents respect all the row level security, column level security, object level security that is in place across your Fabric environment, and make sure that everything is respected from that perspective. And then finally, that publishing layer, number 6 on this diagram. Fabric Data Agents can then be published and surfaced up through your M365 Copilot experience and your team's experience, in addition to linking to other agentic scenarios, such as a multi-agent scenario in AI Foundry and so on, or custom applications, if that happens to be the type of setup that you have. So in summary, the data agent is best thought of as a governed conversational query engine. It combines large language models, multi-source data connections, query translators, security enforcement, and customizable context, all wrapped up in a shareable low-code fabric item, right? That you can publish and then make available through M365, Copilot, and Teams. So now that you have the basics, we've kind of explained it all. Let's actually walk through what it takes to create one of these Fabric data agents, right? So here I'm back in my Fabric workspace, and we can go click New Item. And the one thing I'll say is that I recorded this video when data agents were still in preview. They are now generally available, so you won't see that little preview tag there next to the data agent. And so we'll create our data agent. We'll give it a name. In this case, it's just going to be Zava Retail Data Agent. And we'll click Create. And then that brings us to our data agent canvas, where we can configure this data agent. And so the first thing that we want to do is add our different data sources to this. We've got 3 data sources available to us. In this particular example, we've got our data warehouse, our ontology, and our semantic model. What we can do is we can add all 3. It doesn't have to be just one single data source that you add to a data agent. You can add multiple. So in this case, as part of our data sources, we're going to add the gold zone of our data warehouse, which has our facts and dimensions here. And then we'll go back and we'll add our semantic model as well that we created, that we showed you the diagram of earlier. Very similarly, we're going to add those tables from our semantic model to this as well. And then finally, we can add our ontology to this. That has a lot of our business definitions and relationships and so on there also. Especially would come into play if we had other databases that spanned things that the data warehouse and the semantic model did not have in it. So now that we've added our data sources, the next thing that we can do is we can come in and add our agent instructions. I've already had some agent instructions already created. And so things like, hey, which data source do we want to prioritize? And what are some of the business definitions from a calculations perspective that we want to make sure that we understand? And what are some of the star schema rules that we want to make sure that we enforce? And so now you can see, once we have that created, the data agent is here. We've added our sources, we've added our instructions. And so now we can go in and launch our data agent, and let's test it out and see how it works. So I'm going to close my agent instructions here. And down at the bottom, you can see I've got my chat interface. So what was total revenue by store last quarter? And make sure that you include the year and the quarter in the response. And the reason why I did that, to add that little qualifier at the end, was to make sure that we could go back and test the results of our data agent. And you can see that our total revenue by store in the most completed quarter, which was Q4 2025, was as follows. And so it gives us a nice little response. And we can even drill into the response and see the exact query that it issued to, in this case, our semantic model, which was a DAX query that you can see here. So we could even copy that DAX query, go to our semantic model, paste that, and test that there if we wanted to. But I'm also a SQL guy, and so I always like to make sure that anything that I can do in a semantic model with DAX, I can also do in a data warehouse with a SQL query. And so I want to make sure, so I created a SQL query to validate this. So this is my test harness. And I wanted to go down to my data warehouse and see exactly if, based on the same type of query, if all of my numbers match, and they do. And so we can check that off and validate that all of this worked. So we want to ask another question, like which product categories drive the highest revenue and margin? Then we can ask that of our data agent and see what the results are here. And you can see it's hitting the semantic model for this also. And you can see it gives us a nice result. It gives us the highest revenue categories. It gives us the highest margin categories and kind of summarizes the results as well. All of this data lives in our structured environment. And so we can just ask natural language questions of this to get these results. Next question we're testing with is which stores are at risk due to low inventory on high revenue products. And it says, hey, there aren't any stores that have low inventory levels or below the reorder point. And so therefore, we're all good. Now, this is a sample data set that we're using here, and we didn't have any that kind of met that criteria. So these are just some examples that we have here for what it takes to create a data agent and test some queries and some responses. So we have had the good fortune of being able to roll out Fabric data agents. And now that I've kind of given you guys the nickel tour of what it takes to create a Fabric data agent, want to share a few things that we've learned along the way from our early deployments. And so I think the important thing to realize is that any AI agents, generative AI agents, are by nature probabilistic, meaning there is a statistical algorithm that is predicting what it should respond with. But when it comes to reasoning over structured data, users expect results to be more consistent than just a probabilistic response. So that's where some of these lessons learned can come into play. So making sure that you add instructions for each source that you're leveraging as part of your data agent. Make sure that agents are as narrow in scope as possible. So with fewer sources, fewer tables and columns if you can, because the more that you add to that, then the higher the risk is of an agent coming back with a confusing result. And so I just want to make sure that is clear. So keeping agents as specific as possible certainly helps. And when you pair that with agent instructions, with priority order and fixed schemas and sample questions and so on, these are things that really help your Fabric data agents become more and more deterministic along the way. And then make sure that you and your team creates a repeatable evaluation harness. We don't always know exactly when we're creating these things, exactly what it's going to come back with. So we want to make sure we test and test and test to make sure that it is coming back with very consistent results based on the questions that are asked. And those instructions and those other things that I talked about can certainly go a long way to helping make sure it raises that determinism threshold that we talked about. And so one of the things that we can do to help accelerate adoption of these Fabric data agents is publish these agents to M365 Copilot where users are going to be interacting on a day in and day out basis. And so we can publish these agents. I'll walk you through exactly what that looks like here shortly. But I think making sure that these are published and made available. Now, this, to be clear, this is available to the M365 Copilot, not the Copilot chat or the free experience. I think it's maybe now called Copilot Basic. I want to make sure that is clear. Also, the agent always runs under the user's Azure AD identity. It respects all of the security that everything is set up in your Fabric environment. And Copilot does not elevate any privileges, right? So your user identity is passed down to the Fabric agent, and all of those different permissions are respected and enforced along the way. So Copilot is just the front door in this case. And then we can also interact via Teams. Once that Fabric Data Agent is published to the agent store, we can also use it inside the Teams experience. You can even just do an app mention of that particular agent and interact with it there in Teams chat if you'd like to. So that's a few different ways that we can surface these Fabric Data Agents. And why don't we just show a quick little demo of what it looks like to publish one of these. So back here in my Fabric workspace, I'm going to go into my Fabric Data Agent that I created in the earlier demo. Perfect. And you notice at the top, I have this publish button. And so once we click publish, there's a couple of things that we want to do. Number one, we want to give it a description of the capabilities of the agent. And number two, we want to make sure that toggle that we're going to publish this to the agent store is turned on. And then once we have published it, Fabric automatically sets up an MCP server and provides a URL in which all of, M365 Copilot can find the data agent and interact with it directly. So I'm going to launch my M365 Copilot experience. And you can see over on the left nav that my Zava retail agent shows up here. So when I click on it, now I can start to answer questions of my Fabric Data Agent right here in M365 Copilot. So let's just type in, what are our top customers by lifetime value? And it's going to connect to that data agent and then bring back that list of top customers by lifetime value. Even includes some of the total orders and the first and most recent order dates. So this is a nice little example. We can even ask some additional questions here, like now, can you represent this data as a column chart? So you can actually visualize the data as well, which is a nice little feature to have. And so depending on if you're a visual person or not. And so let's launch into our Teams experience and see if we can access our data agent from there. And so over here on the left nav, you see the Copilot button that we have. And essentially just from Teams, it allows us to get straight back into that same Copilot experience also. All right. So just wanted to kind of show you guys a quick little example of what it takes to publish the data agents. And I think typically what we get asked a lot is questions about how does Fabric Data Agent support multi-agent scenarios? To be clear, the way Microsoft kind of categorizes all the agentic scenarios from low code or no code experiences, like what you get with Copilot, to low code experiences with Copilot Studio and pro code experiences with AI Foundry. Once you've created all the data foundation, it's not really counting that, but Fabric Data Agents is a low code experience. We're just configuring Fabric Data Agents. We're not having to write any additional code other than all the data foundation that you've already configured. Because Fabric Data Agents support Model Context Protocol by default, or MCP, if you're not sure what MCP is, just like Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP is a way that web pages and web servers route and communicate which website that we want to launch into. Model Context Protocol is a similar type of protocol for agents, but it provides a lot more context so that in instructions and all the things that you saw when we configured this agent, it allows us to configure, have these Fabric Data Agents participate in other multi-agent scenarios. So with all of that, just to kind of summarize some of the lessons learned here, I think the first thing that I would say is we want to make sure that we get the semantic layer. This is kind of the foundation, whether it is a semantic model that you're used to working with Power BI or an ontology in a very complex scenario with a lot of different databases that you have in your Fabric environment, then that can play a very critical role in making sure that the agent has enough contextual information to know what to work with. We can make sure that we add all the critical metadata in terms of the relationships and how all of that is put together. Make sure that you include all your instructions for your agent with example queries, prioritization, those types of things. Make sure you test and tune your data agent. It may not work exactly like you want it to right out of the gate. You may need a few iterations to make sure that you work with it to tune those responses appropriately. And then enable the business users with organizational change enablement. It's not just a throw it over the wall and hope that they use it. You're going to have to make sure that you work with those users to make sure that they understand what the proper expectations are and how to ask questions properly. I think with all of that, there are things like making sure that your data models have, I mentioned the metadata, the descriptions, and other semantics there to make sure you have that and follow that path there that you see in terms of semantics, the ontology, the instructions, tuning it, and then enabling the organization appropriately. And so I'll end my portion here with one last poll. And so based on what you've heard about Fabric Data Agents today, how soon do you think you'd be exploring Fabric Data Agents? Either 6 months, 6 to 12, beyond 12, or you're not really considering it right now.
Well, let's see. It's always like the race of the mascots at the baseball stadium, Jeff, here, as we watch the bars bounce around.
That's right.
I'm sensing a lot of enthusiasm, Jeff. It's what I'm seeing.
Hey, I like those numbers.
Well, excellent. So, and every time you do this, and I listen to you talk about this, I'm heartened to say that even though I was hacking it together 2 years ago, some of the core concepts about providing good instruction, trying to find and create data understandability for a large language model that would struggle with context and other things like that, all of those issues and hurdles are there to overcome. The toolbox is just now so much better, so much more structured, and it exists within a context of security and manageability that's just so much better now. It's exciting to see. We'll get to your questions in a moment. If you have more, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll start pulling master of ceremonies here a little bit and work through them. So get them in now if you haven't already. So I think, as we just talked about, that data understandability and context, pretty critical. Data definition, ontology, really the table stakes. If you can't understand a large language model, it's not going to have a chance. Explain and constrain. I think that set of instructions is always, there's really just no way around it, especially when you're trying to nudge it in the right direction. And then really scaling the value of this. I think one of the things that Jeff highlighted as a learning is also an opportunity. Constrain, go for that narrow lane. A narrow lane will probably support a very focused use case that allows you to pilot, learn, and understand with this technology early on. So I think just all sorts of possibilities. And then, once you really want to run with scissors, really from, easily surfacing an M365 all the way to thinking about how this exists in a multi-agentic ecosystem, leveraging MCP and tools like Foundry, all sorts of exciting things out there. So with that, I'm going to go back in the list and start pulling off some of the questions here. Jeff, any other lessons learned from our early customers so far? You've already kind of unpacked quite a few here.
Do not want to underemphasize the testing aspect of things, right? And so making sure that you test and tune that and allow enough time to do that, right? Because I think that is one of the things that we've done several iterations with our customers that we've rolled this out to, and make sure that that is a critical piece that should not be overlooked. For sure.
Yeah. One of the other questions that we had is, this is from Ricardo, if a user is using data agent to, let's say, ask questions on how new tariffs are affecting business or reading public info about their competitors to Bing, Since that is managed in conjunction with the Azure Foundry agent, is there separate charge for Azure Foundry too?
Yes, so Foundry is treated separately from the Fabric data. And Fabric rolls up, uses the compute for your Fabric capacity, right? And Foundry, depending on how you have that agent set up, would be rolling up within the Foundry compute that is being used to serve that up as well.
And then what have we seen in terms of the largest data sets that we've gone after with this? One of Angel made a comment about how does it behave with large amounts of data, like 30 million records plus or other things like that. Have we seen customers wading into that?
I know some of our more mature Power BI models, we have rolled these out to. Now, I don't have row counts. They fit within Fabric capacities and all of that stuff. So I would have to go back and report back to you on that. But I do know it's in the millions of records. It's not just, and over multiple years. I think we rolled that solution out initially in, say, the 2020 timeframe. And so it's got at least 6 years of history. That's a part of it. And it's a multinational manufacturing client that I'm one of the ones I'm thinking of. And it is not a sample size. It is a full production solution there.
That's awesome. I think that's all the questions that I'm seeing here in the chat. Just to wrap up a couple of things. This is a season of the year where Microsoft is always invested in their customer success, but especially now. And so I think one of the things that we often do with customers is help folks who are ready, who are checking off those prereqs that you talked about, take those first steps with Fabric Data Agents. And for those of you who are leaving today's webinar saying, yeah, I'd like to do it, and maybe I'd like some help, there's funding available from Microsoft to work with folks like us here at Lantern to help you with that. So you can talk to your Microsoft rep who invited you, if that's how you got to today, or reach out to us. Jeff, if you want to throw our information up there.
Yep,
yeah, reach out and connect to us. As I said, it's an exciting opportunity to sort of take those first steps. And go ahead and connect both the QR codes up there or Jeff and I's LinkedIn. So it'd be great to hear from you. Thanks for joining us for today.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Really appreciate the time.